What's up, everybody? Welcome back for some World War I notes continued. So for this, you're not going to have a ton of stuff to write down, but there's a few odds and ends things that I will have you add into your notes today. Just pick up where we had left off last week, where I'd kind of done the introduction of World War I. You might want to draw a little line right there and then just hop down a line and pick up and add these notes in there. Basically, what I'm talking about today will be kind of the air war. Now, World War I said this is the first big war to happen since the Industrial Revolution has really played out. So it changes everything. You have more modern weapons. Now, it looks old timey and real old school for what we're used to today, but we're living 100 years later. And yeah, you got to think planes, trains, automobiles, Jeeps, machine guns, all of that stuff was brand new at this time. So there's a ton of new equipment coming out. The thing is, it's all very new and we don't know how to use it yet. That's pretty much true for all sides. The Central Powers and the Allies, they're trying to figure out how this new technology can give them an advantage over the enemy and help break that stalemate gridlock that's going on in the war. So you have Germany right here in the middle. Okay. Germany had invaded through Belgium right there in the trench lines. If you follow my cursor, kind of go from here in Switzerland right on up through to the English Channel. So at this point in the war, the French and the British are fighting in the trenches over here. Germany is fighting in the trenches on this side. Now, a thing that threw a wrench in the plans that we'll talk more about later, Russia mobilized quicker than Germany thought. So, and the German offensive into France had kind of stalled out. So Germany had to basically move troops early, pull them out of the Western Front with the British and French, and add some over here to fight the Russians. Now, the Russian army is horribly incompetent, even though they have high numbers. Basically, about 20% of the German army, and then Austria, which was also kind of a mess, are able to hold off the whole Russian army because the German technology is so much better. It isn't quite of a stalemate, deadlock trench war out in the east. Actually, the Germans probably could have advanced and pushed way deep into Russia. They just didn't have enough guys to do it. So a very small fraction of the German army is holding the Russians at bay. I just thought a few of you might have questions about that. Okay, moving on now. Here are the few notes that I want you to add in. So a couple just key points, and I put the stuff that is most important and crucial that you know in the bold black. So the war in the air. World War I is essentially the first war where planes are used in a big way. All right, I'm going to show you some of those planes in just a second. Most of these guys are old cavalry officers. That's kind of a key thing you might want to put in there too. So remember the scene from War Horse last week where they're doing that charge. These British officers are tally-ho and charge, and they're running into German machine gun fire, and those guys just get cut down and massacred. That happened over and over and over again in the opening months of the war. Both sides lost a lot of guys in pointless charges. Now they've dug trenches and it's kind of that stalemate. Well, you still had these cavalry officers that hadn't all been killed. There are still units that didn't get thrown to the front and massacred. But what are you going to do with these guys? Now they're kind of realizing we can't just charge enemy machine gun nests. These guys, often the cavalry officers, were the more prestigious guys that came from good families and wealthier backgrounds, and they wanted to have action for king and country and all that. So what do you do with these guys? A lot of them didn't want to go and just be a common soldier in the trenches, and kind of the answer for a lot of them is they're going to become pilots. There's this new technology coming out, and it's kind of tricky and it's very dangerous, but we can spy on the enemy. We could potentially maybe go drop bombs on them. We can go shoot at them. So planes get picked up, and most of those guys that had been cavalry officers, they transfer into the air squadrons. I want you to know, key thing that'll definitely come up on the test, this, of every job you could do during World War I, being a flyboy, being a pilot is actually statistically the most dangerous job. Most of these guys got shot down before they ever got a kill. Usually your first couple missions were the most dangerous, and almost 4 out of 5 times, I think is kind of the stat I've heard before. You get shot down by a more experienced pilot on the other side before you even ever get enough experience to be good yourself. These guys went through a couple weeks, maybe a month or two of training at best, and then it's just have at it, go shoot some enemy down. A nickname for them. So they're pilots. these guys that were cavalry officers, now they're pilots, but the slang at the time was they're flyboys. So flyboys kind of sounds cool, has a nice ring to it. Just some descriptors for these flyboys. Now I'm stereotyping here. It doesn't mean every single pilot acted like this, but they were generally kind of popular, outspoken guys. They were often partiers. They usually were sharp dressed. They had their nice uniforms, and think they're not sleeping out in the trenches, getting rained on and snowed on. These guys actually slept behind the lines in nice barracks and stuff, or in houses that they would rent sometimes. Because, like I said, many of them were from wealthier families, and they lived in relative comfort. So think of that trade off there. Like on the one hand, the soldiers out in the trenches, you saw a little bit of what trench life is like. It looks miserable. It would be horrible living out in the trenches. I think it's one of the most rotten experiences for soldiers from any war I can think of in history, to be in the trenches of World War I. So the flyboys, they don't have to deal with that. They live in comfort. They have a warm bed. They get to go drink and party with the local girls. On the other hand, so it might seem like they got everything going for them. On the other hand, they're doing the most dangerous job in the world, literally, like at this point in history. By far the most dangerous job in the war. The only other job that it comes close to that in terms of casualty rates would be if you were on a German U-boat, a German submarine, because most of those guys ended up getting killed by the end of the war too. Anyway, we'll come back to submarines in a different note slide show down the road. So Flyboys, super dangerous. You had a lot going for you. You know, it was kind of a cool job, but on the other hand, you probably weren't going to make it too long. Most of these guys, I think the average life expectancy, which you could put in there, now this is just an average, was something like 6 weeks once you became a pilot. So most of them didn't make it that long. Now, if you could get past that first maybe month or two when you were new and you were just kind of getting your feet wet and figuring it out, if you could get past that, a lot of the pilots that survived through the opening months of their combat experience then ended up doing really good, and many survived the war. Experience was everything. If you became an experienced pilot and got good, other pilots were often these newbies on the other side were easy pickings, and you could go shoot them down, and you just had enough experience to survive and keep yourself safe up there. Another thing, I'm sure everybody's heard the word ace before, like nice job, ace, you know what I mean? Or ace of spades, like in cards. Well, the term ace, I think it was originally a card term, but it starts getting used like as a slang, like, hey, you're a cool guy, you're awesome. Nice job, ace. Aces in World War I were a pilot that got 5 kills or more. Now, there's a whole long list of guys that did that, but like statistically, the vast majority of pilots did not get it. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm getting a thumbs up from Mr. Withers. He likes to eavesdrop on my history notes. So anyway, if you're an ace, you got 5 kills or more. All right, we'll talk more about some aces in a second, or at least a real notable one. Here you go, planes throughout the war. Now, planes change a lot through World War I. Through the whole war, each side invests lots of money into making better planes. And honestly, like usually several times a year, every couple months, the engineers from one country or another come out with a better plane. And then sometimes, like the other guys' planes will crash behind the trench lines, and you check them out and you see what they've come up with. And then you steal their technology and incorporate it into your new model of plane. So planes at the beginning of the war, look at my top left where the cursor is. They basically almost look like kites with an engine strapped to it. All right. These planes, I mean, think the Wright brothers were like 20 years before this. If you ever seen their plane, it looks pretty flimsy and kind of sketchy. Planes were made out of balsa wood, like really light wood, because they were trying to get the weight down, and canvas wrapped over it. So basically, you're flying a wood kite with canvas wrapped around it and a small little engine up front that's got the propeller to give you that momentum and lift. So planes, beginning of the war, very flimsy, not structurally sound, super dangerous. Often, like, it wasn't even that you'd get shot down. Sometimes your plane would just crash and it wouldn't make it. Now here, by midway in the war, here is, and I'm using different countries for examples, this is a British Sopwith Camel. This was a big plane in, like, I believe 1915, 16, and they made different models of it throughout the war where they would update some things and make it better. But there's a Sopwith Camel about halfway through the war. Looks a little more structurally sound, looks like a better flying machine than the one to the left of it. And then by the very end of the war, now I'm switching sides for you, there's a German Albatross. That was supposed to be the best plane in World War I. And it should be, because it was the last one to come out before the war ended. This plane, I guess, is starting to get where it's looking more like a modern plane. Much more powerful engine. I've actually seen, I think they had another model come out where it only had one wing. So think these old planes, the engines are so weak, they have to have multiple wings to give them more lift and keep them up. And they would tie it all together and keep it more structurally sound. So in World War I, you see most of the planes are bi-wing planes. Now, there are some tri-wing ones that you may have seen in a very popular Snoopy cartoon where he pretends to fight the Red Baron. I'll show you that one too. But most of the planes for all sides in World War I actually were bi-wing planes. They had two wings. All right. Next up, tomorrow I'm going to be showing you a scene out of a movie called Flyboys. I love it. It's a great movie that is loosely based on actual events. So there really was a Lafayette Escadrille squadron, all right, in the French Air Force. The movie, though, so if you ever watch it, and I highly recommend you watch this whole movie, I'm just going to show you a few choice scenes of some dogfights, which are planes fighting in World War I. Now, I recommend you watch the whole movie, but just be aware that like all of the actual characters in the movie, led by super dreamy James Franco, they fictionalize the actual names. So like the Franco in the movie plays, oh God, his name is Rawlings. All right. There was no real Rawlings. He's actually loosely based on a real pilot named Frank Luke, who really fought in the Lafayette Escadrille. So they kind of like, it's like a historical fiction. They set it all in an accurate historical context, and they show some dogfights pretty darn close to what they would actually look like. But they kind of fictionalize the stories about these guys because they honestly, I don't think they knew that much about them personally to actually make a movie about them. One of the interesting things now, America, we had talked about like racism a little bit and how the racism of 100 years ago was totally different from the racism that would exist today. I mean, it was just blatant and like in your face, and we were a segregated country. Now, there were definitely racial tensions in Europe too, but not quite to the level as they were in America. France was pretty progressive. France was not segregated. So these American pilots, like for one reason or another, this is before America gets involved in the war, they go over there, like not as a group, but just as individuals, and they believed in the cause for one reason or another. Some of them were actually like running from the law. Others came from wealthy families, and they felt like they needed to like earn honor. Some just didn't have a whole lot of opportunities, or maybe just believed in the war effort and wanted to see the Allies win. So for one reason or another, these different American guys went over and joined up with the French Air Force. And pilots, they couldn't find enough of them because even though they lived in comfort, it was so dangerous. Not a lot of guys were itching to sign up for the escadrille or the Air Force or squadrons. So they actually, getting back to my point, you notice there are some black guys in there in the Lafayette Escadrille. It's because it was an integrated unit. Because they were in the French Air Force, they all got to, serve together. But if they were in the American Air Force later on when America joins the war, no way that would have flown because the Army was still segregated. So I make sure you put in Lafayette Escadrille. It basically is like a French word for squadron, but it was all American pilots. And then they named it Lafayette. Anybody know why they might name it Lafayette? It's something Fry would have explained last year. So Lafayette, the Marquis de Lafayette, was one of General George Washington's right-hand men. The Marquis de Lafayette helped America. He was a Frenchman that came over in our time of need and helped America win its independence from England. So they named this squadron the Lafayette Escadrille because these are Americans that are going to help out France in its time of need. All right, here's some more pics from the Lafayette Escadrille. They actually used an American Indian as like one of their monikers or logos. So a very distinctly American thing. The Europeans wouldn't, have anything quite like that. So they were very recognizable up in the air. And then in some of the scenes in the movie, I'll probably have one or two where you see they actually had a pet lion, which I don't know the whole story for that. The lion's name was Whiskey. Anyway, and then they have another cub there. How they got that, I don't know, but you can see in multiple photos of the real guys from the Lafayette Escadrille that they had a mascot lion living with them. So I always thought that was kind of interesting. You see some awesome images from dogfights in World War I. So another term you could throw in there if you haven't already, a dogfight is a fight amongst planes where pilots are squaring off and trying to shoot each other down. I guess some of the best entertainment out in the trenches, which trench life would have been tedious and boring and disgusting. But boredom really impacted these soldiers too, because most of the time you're not in a big battle. You're sitting out there just kind of watching the enemy, and they're watching you, and you aren't even shooting. You're just sitting out in a trench. But occasionally they'd have dogfights take place over the trenches, and lots of soldiers down there said that that was great entertainment, that actually watching the planes and rooting for your side to shoot the other side down, it was kind of an awesome part of the war in a weird way. Anyway, you'd get to, if you're out in the trenches, you probably would see dogfights from time to time. Now, I told you most of the planes in World War II on both sides were bi-wing, means they had two wings. There is an exception, the Fokker D7, I think, which was actually one of the best German planes. It was a German plane that had three wings. Apparently, it was fairly fast, but having that extra wing would kind of catch wind in a different way, and it made them pretty maneuverable. You may have heard of the Red Baron, which I have a slide on him coming up next. I guess the Fokker D7, which is that plane pictured there, that was like one of his favorite planes because he flew like 7-8 planes throughout the war. Most German planes were painted green or a black or a silver, but the Red Baron, that's what he was known for. He was a really good pilot and was the leader of a squadron. He always had his painted bright red. Here's a little piece of propaganda. Miss Wilkins, the student teacher, is going to do a lesson on propaganda next week, and all of you that are artists, that'll be your time to shine, as we're going to do propaganda posters in the near future. But here's a piece of propaganda for joining up in the British Air Force. All right, last part. Let me move my face here. The last thing I'd have you write down on the notes today is just a specific name of a pilot, and he's actually not an American, but kind of a notable guy. The Red Baron, or his real name is Manfred Richthofen, has gone down in history, is probably the single most legendary pilot in all history, coming from the First War when planes were used. And he also, to this day, has more confirmed kills than any other pilot from any war in history. Now, he doesn't end up surviving the war. He had a couple bad crashes and got concussed. And at the end of the war, I guess he was like he wasn't bringing his A game, and he actually gets shot down. He flies too close to the trenches, and a machine gunner that they're pretty sure it was a unit from Australia actually shot him from the trenches, and the bullet hit through and kind of hit an artery. He was able to land his plane, but he bled out and died right at the tail end. Anyway, remember I said if you got 5 kills, you were an ace. Well, he had, I believe the last time I looked and kind of dug into this, something like 150 confirmed kills or probable kills. So think about that. If 5 kills makes you an ace, he's like, what, ace like 40 times over, 30 times over? I don't know. But man, that's an impressive amount of kills when you figure most pilots never even get 1 kill. But that's how that experience gap, how much that played into it. If you really got good, you could start racking up the kills in a big way. And each side had pilots that rack up quite a few. America's top pilot was a guy named Eddie Rickenbacker. And then the guy from the movie Flyboys, where you'll be seeing some of it, was named Frank Luke. The real Frank Luke actually dies at the very end of the war. He gets shot down too, and gets in a fight with some ground soldiers shooting back and forth at him. Here is an image of the Red Baron going down. I guess apparently the day that he was killed, right in the closing months of the war, he was pursuing a British plane, trying to shoot this guy down. And apparently after he was concussed, he had like certain ironclad rules that he 100% would follow, and they kept him safe. One of the biggest ones is you don't fly close to the enemy trenches ever, because when you'd fly close to the other guy's trenches, the planes were clearly marked and guys would be shooting at you. So apparently after that concussion, he got where he was like almost would get tunnel vision, and he would get really focused on what he was doing. And he wasn't paying attention to everything around him. So he was focused in on this plane. He came in too close to the trenches. Another plane was following him from behind, pursuing him. But some guys with a machine gun shot him. So that was the end of Richthofen. All right, that's all I got for you today. Hopefully you found this stuff interesting. Like airplanes in World War I don't critically impact the outcome of the war, but it's a cool part of the war. And probably the most important thing they were used for was actually watching what the enemy was doing. Now you had eyes in the sky. I hope you really like the scenes from the movie Flyboys that I'll be showing you tomorrow. I'll probably put in a few little snippets of commentary, but mostly I just want you to kick back, soak it in, and enjoy the movie. If you like it, go check it out. It used to be on Netflix, not sure if it still is, but the movie's Flyboys. Great show. Check it out. And that's what I got for you today.